1, 2, 3, 4. Please sing along. Some of Dan's favorite Beatles songs. What would you think if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ear and I'll sing you a song. I will try not to sing out of key. Everybody. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Gonna try with a little help from my friends. What do I do when my love is away? Does it worry you to be alone? How does it feel at the end of the day? Are you sad because you're on your own? No, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Gonna try with a little help from my friends. Do you need anybody? I need somebody to love. Could it be anybody? I want somebody to love. Would you believe in a love at first sight? Yes, I'm certain that it happens all the time. How do you see when you turn out the light? I can't tell you, but I know it's mine. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Gonna try with a little help from my friends. Do you need anybody? I need somebody to love. Could it be anybody? I need somebody to love. So what would you think if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ear and I'll sing you a song. I will try not to sing out of key. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. Gonna try with a little help from my friends. I get by with a little help from my friends. A little help from my friends. Well, I'll play from your friends. Thank you. These are some of Dan's favorites. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life you have only waited for this moment to rise. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these sunken eyes and learn to see. All your life you have only waited for this moment to be free. Oh, blackbird fly, blackbird fly, into the light of the dark black night. The dark black night. Blackbirds singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You have only waited for this moment to rise. You have only waited for this moment to rise. You have only waited for this moment to rise. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun. I said, it's all right. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. I said, it's all right. Little darling, the smile's returning to the faces. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been clear. Here comes the sun. Doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun. I said, it's all right. Sun, 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 here it comes. 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 Little darling, I feel the ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been clear. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun. I said, it's all right. Sun, 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 here it comes. 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 Little darling, I feel the long and lonely winter. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been clear. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun. I said, it's all right. It's all right. Enough of that. We're going to get started in just a moment. Kim asked me to play some of these Beatles favorites of Dan's. This last Beatles song was a song that she told me that was a song that Dan sang to Allison before she went to bed every night at the end of the night. So it was a special song for the family. Sing along if you know this one. Who knows how long I've loved you? You know I love you still. If I wait a lonely lifetime, if you want me to, I will. For if I ever saw you, I didn't catch your name, but it never really mattered. I will always feel the same. Love you forever and forever. Love you with all my heart. Love you whenever we're together. Love you when we're apart. And when at last I find you, your song will fill the air. Sing it loud so I can hear you. Make it easy to be near you. For the things you do endear me to you. Want me to, I will. I will. Everybody. Do 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 do. There you go.
Thank you, Mark, for that beautiful music. Good afternoon, Kim. How's this? Can everybody at home hear me too? Good afternoon to Kim, Allison, Sandy, Lori, family, friends, Tilsonites, Kingstonians, friends and family from all over, people who live locally, people who've come from farther away, people joining us online. Thank you for joining us all at this memorial service for Dan Giordano. My name is Ron Fine. I knew Dan since we were about 3 years old. I know many of you as well. Before we begin today, I'd like you all to imagine a different world than the one that we live in. A world where this all happened much later. If this were happening in 2056 instead of 2026, then Allison would gather a few close friends and relatives, some of whom haven't even been born yet, and they would celebrate Dan's long life. If this were happening in 2046, then we would come and we'd say, he should have had a little more time. If this were happening in 2036, I at least would glare at the sky and say, how dare you take Dan from us so early? But we're not so lucky. We're not so lucky to live in any of those worlds. We live in this far worse world where Dan was taken from us not at 83, not at 73, not even at 63, but at 53. To quote from Genesis, not the book in the Bible, but rather Dan's favorite band, this is the world we live in. And these are the hands we're given. And so far too soon, we are all gathered here today to honor Dan's life, memory, and legacy. So here's what's gonna happen this afternoon. There's gonna be some poetry. Tim Langley has memorized completely a poem. There's gonna be some more music. There's gonna be a Jewish prayer for the dead called El Male Rachamim. I'm gonna come back a little later on and say some words. There's gonna be a photo slideshow. There's gonna be an open mic opportunity for anyone here to come up and say whatever is in their heart. Then Dan's mother, Sandy, will lead the mourner's Kaddish. which is a Jewish prayer that's not so much for the dead as for the mourners. And finally, Kim will close us out. There might be some tears today. I personally will probably get a little verklempt. I might get a little verschimmelt. Hopefully not completely verblunget, but many of us saw a version of that photo slideshow from a similar event that was held in Seattle a few weeks ago, and you should definitely have some tissues for that part. So there are tissue boxes scattered strategically.
We got the good tissues.
The good ones, not the Scott 1000. So, you know, prepare for some tears, but not only tears. Not only tears. There will also be some warm memories, some funny stories, and there might even be a couple of jokes. God knows Dan would have wanted there to be jokes. And after that, there will be pizza and, of course, cannoli. And Diet Coke. Who could forget that? So, Dan, if you're out there, up there, watching, I hope this memorial service pleases you. I hope it does you proud. But if not, Dan, if it displeases you in any way, please indicate that by sending a white feather drifting across the room and a red feather drifting across the room from the opposite direction, one rising and one falling, meeting precisely in the center of the room. And then, Dan, if we see that, then we'll know that we messed up somehow. Otherwise, we'll figure we nailed it. So now I'd like to call on Dan's fellow Tilsonite and friend since childhood, Tim Langley.
Memorization sometimes includes paper. I am standing upon the seashore. A ship at my side spreads her white sails to the moving breeze and starts for the blue ocean. She is an object of beauty and strength. I stand and watch her until, at length, she hangs like a speck of white cloud just where the sea and sky come to mingle with each other. Then, someone at my side says, "There, she's gone." Gone where? Gone from my sight. That is all. She's just as large in her mast, hull, and spar as she was when she left my side. And she is just as able to hear her load of living freight to her destined port. Her diminished size is in me, not in her. And just at the moment when someone says, "There, she is gone," there are other eyes watching her coming, and other voices ready to take up the glad shout, "Here she comes." And that is dying.
Hi. Yeah. I'm Aaron. I didn't grow up here. I'm the new guy. I've only known Dan for 30 years. But I knew enough to know that he wasn't really into the God stuff. But I also know that he was a cautious man and an IT guy to the end. And so he was big on, you know, as an IT guy, he understood backup plans and contingencies, and so this prayer is basically a prayer to you know, hey, wherever he is, maybe he should, you know, get a good room, maybe something with a view, with room for his friends, you know. This is a prayer to treat Dan's soul well, and so. Just in case, we'll do this. Excuse me. I didn't bring my pitchfork, my pitch pipe, so I just need there we go. אלמלא רחמים שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה. במעלת קדשים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמת דניאל בן רופס ריבושה שהלך לעולמו. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, ענה בעל הרחמים, הסתירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר אמן. Dan, if that didn't do it, I don't know what else.
My name is Mark Rust. Kim and I have done a lot of singing together over the years, live in concert and on recordings. And when Kim contacted me and let me know that Dan had passed, I sent her this song because as singers and musicians, that's how we comfort each other. And so sometime later, I was watching, like some of you, the service from the West Coast on my computer. And I had got it on my computer, which was a great success. And I'm watching along, fumbling with the different knobs. How can I get the screen bigger? Can I get the volume? And suddenly I saw my face on the screen singing. And I was like, oh no, what did I do? And now I'm searching to get me off the screen and back to the service. Till I finally realized that was at the service. And I thought Dan, as an IT guy, would have really enjoyed me fumbling around trying to get me off the screen. But we get to sing it live today. What will we do without you? We were the pieces, you were the glue, always pulling us through. What will we do? How are we going to go on? You were the one we could always count on. When you were needed, you knew. What will we do? Close the lights, hold the phone. We can't face that we're alone. Someday soon we'll pull through, but we'll never stop missing you. Why did you leave us so soon? Some say that heaven was needing you. I'd like to believe that it's true. What will we do? Close the lights, hold the phone. We can't face that we're alone. Someday soon we'll pull through, but we'll never stop missing you. Close the lights, hold the phone. We can't face that we're alone. Someday soon we'll pull through, but we'll never stop missing you. What will we do without you? We were the pieces, you were the glue, always pulling us through. What will we do without you? We were the pieces, you were the glue, always pulling us through. Now without you, what will we do?
Thank you again, Mark. I was just chopping some onions over in the back room, so don't mind my eye allergies here.
There's the good tissue.
Yeah, Kleenex brand. All right, I'm gonna read now two little speeches. The first one is from Kim. Daniel Giordano, age 53, son, husband, father, and friend, died in the early hours of January 17, 2026 at the Walkner Hospice Center at Evergreen Health in Kirkland, Washington. A proud New Yorker, Dan was born at Brooklyn Jewish Hospital on May 27, 1972, and grew up in Tilson in the beautiful Hudson Valley. His childhood was full of Boy Scouts, and he had a real Boy Scout troop, not like the one I went to. Jim knows the one I'm talking about. No, Dan's was like serious. They were very in depth. Running around with the Tilsonites, friends since birth, and all in the same little neighborhood, and fun on his father's boats in the Hudson River. Dan's family on both sides is from Brooklyn and Long Island, and he was so proud of that connection. He celebrated his bar mitzvah on Mount Masada in Israel in 1985. His parents gave him the choice of having a party at home or the trip to Israel, and he took the trip. He graduated from Kingston High School with us in 1990. So many of the friends he made in high school, he stayed close with until the day he died. And some of us are here today. They dropped everything to come across the country and visit him. Some of his high school friends shared these memories. I remember him telling jokes and following them with "Badum-ts." Whenever it would come up in a class that it was someone's birthday, Dan would start singing the Beatles song "Birthday," which he would tender as "Na na 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 na, it's your birthday, you say it's your birthday." Dan attended SUNY Binghamton from 1991 to 95, majoring in political science, and there it was the same thing. He made many friends with whom he was still close up until his death. To know Dan was to be his friend. Kim and Dan met for the first time at a mutual friend's Sweet 16 party. I don't think I'm breaking any secrets by saying that that mutual friend is here today. The way Kim tells it, Dan was hot for the birthday girl, and Kim was hot for Dan's friend. The way Dan told it was, ask Kim. Dan and Kim started hanging out at age 19, dating on and off until age 21 when they got serious. In the summer of 1995, Dan went to visit me, Ron, who had been hired by a little company called Microsoft. And he spent the summer crashing on Ron's floor. It's a little better than that makes it sound. There was like a little alcove, but and falling in love with Seattle. In September 1995, he and Kim made their way across the country to start a life there. And they said they would stay for only a couple of years, but they ended up creating a rich life for 30 plus years in the gorgeous Pacific Northwest. After driving across the country in Dan's Pontiac 6000 STE with a few changes of clothes, some pillows, and Dan's entire CD collection, which took up 2 milk crates, they made it to the Emerald City. Dan had never lived outside New York State until he moved to Seattle, and he often said that it was the best move he ever made. Seattle has been very good to us, indeed. Dan's first job in Seattle was working for the Seattle Tennis Club for pocket money during that first summer in Seattle. He checked in people like Bill Gates and other local celebrities. Somehow that reference to Bill Gates, I feel like, is a little...
I could have said the local celebrities, but nobody would know Gene Anderson from King Clyde.
Fair enough, fair enough. Many celebrities who were not compromised recently. When Kim came to visit Seattle in July 1995, before they decided to move together, Dan brought her to the tennis club to show her the incredible view of Mount Rainier from the Seattle Tennis Club's parking lot. How romantic. Dan's first full-time job was at Federated American Insurance Company in Bothell, which is just north of Seattle. He worked there for a couple of years and decided he could put his self-taught computer expertise to better use. So his IT career began when he was hired at the Nordstrom IT help desk in 1996. In 2005, he moved to a just out of startup company called Concur and started a 20-plus year career at Concur, which was later bought by SAP, working a variety of roles in product support, project management, change management, Scrum Master, and other roles that couldn't be defined except by him. Seriously, if you asked him what he did, he would just say, "You wouldn't understand, so just say I'm an IT professional." After 9 years together, Dan and Kim made it official in 2001. So many of you here were also in attendance on that special day. And in 2008, they welcomed their only child, Allison, who is the light of Dan's life. I'm not sure how you could put the details of being Allison's dad into one short eulogy. Dan was not the most outwardly demonstrative person emotionally, but he always supported Allison. Every concert, every figure skating performance, every play, every birthday party, he was so proud of you, Allison. More than he could ever say. Now, Dan was a walking encyclopedia of music, movies, and TV. He especially loved bands like the Beatles, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, Billy Joel, Elton John, Jason Isbell, and Stevie Wonder. But most of all, he knew everything about the band Genesis and Phil Collins. Everything. I think he also knew a fair amount about Peter Gabriel and Mike and the Mechanics and all the other Genesis spin-offs too. But yeah, there was really everything about Genesis. I understand. He scoured torrent sites for hours looking for live shows to share with his friends. He devoured Turner Classic Movies. He loved filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, Steven Spielberg. He loved comedians, especially David Letterman, George Carlin, Conan O'Brien, and Mel Brooks. Dan used humor to get through life. He could quote so many of his favorite routines and lines. His daily conversation was peppered with them. He was a curious person who loved learning about all kinds of things and giving advice, even sometimes if you didn't ask for the advice. Underneath, he just wanted to be helpful, and if he knew something that he thought would help you, he would let you know. Later in his life, Dan became a watch collector, learning about their design, movement, and impeccable timekeeping. Dan was a stickler for being on time, sometimes to a fault. He was not a huge sports fan, but he always stood out as a Mets fan among the sea of Mariners fans in Seattle, especially when he accompanied Kim to her national anthem performances at T-Mobile Park. If you're wondering if Dan would have cheered on the Seahawks in the Super Bowl, it wouldn't have mattered to him, but he would have been happy for Kim. And he was always happy to eat Super Bowl snacks with a Diet Coke, cold, no ice. Dan always bemoaned the lack of good Italian food in the Seattle area. So it was an adventure to try different places to see if they held up to his expectations. Rarely. He loved to tell people in the Pacific Northwest about Savona's Pizza, formerly Plaza Pizza, and of course that the best bread is from Dysing's Bakery. Dan and his father Ralph taught Kim how to make the family tomato sauce and meatballs, and Dan would do the same job he had as a kid, opening the cans and blitzing the tomatoes. And when Allison came of age, he taught them too. He also loved boats and being near the water, having grown up on the Hudson, and he always felt a connection to nature. So many summer trips back to Tilson were spent on the boat called the Lori Dan 3 and at Hidden Harbor. Dan was a prolific blood donor, giving over 1.5 gallons during his lifetime because he knew he could help others by his O-negative status. In the last weeks of his life, others with this O-negative status helped him reach 2026 and Allison's 18th birthday. If Dan wanted to leave you with anything, it's that voting is your superpower. He never missed an election. He had choice words for those currently in power. But we're going to keep it neutral here, but he saved the most for people who didn't vote at all. Devastated to leave him are his wife of 24 years and partner of 33 years, Kim, their child Allison, mother Sandy Giordano, and sister Lori Giordano, sister and brother-in-law Amy and Mike Goulbourne, mother-in-law Jen Hillock, and chosen family, the Sears family. Welcoming him are those who preceded him, his father, Ralph Giordano, his aunt, Frances Clemente, his grandmothers, Rose Baldil and Mary Marzullo. Numerous aunts, uncles, and cousins also survive and miss him. Something that touched Dan deeply was when David Letterman dedicated his entire October 30th, 2002 show to artist Warren Zevon, who'd been diagnosed a month earlier with terminal lung cancer. Letterman asked Zevon about what might have changed for him after his cancer diagnosis. Zevon responded, "You're reminded to enjoy every sandwich and every minute playing with the guys and being with the kids. Enjoy every sandwich." Now, I'm going to read my own remarks. Earlier this week, I confessed to Kim that I had been dreading and avoiding putting my thoughts onto paper for eulogy. And Kim said, "I have a feeling Dan will guide you in what to say." That made me think, because this is actually the second time that I've written a speech for and about Dan. The first time was a best man wedding toast at Dan and Kim's wedding, and I confessed to Dan beforehand that I wasn't sure where to start. So, seeking to reassure me, Dan said, "Just be yourself and don't be afraid to throw in a few fart jokes." Which I did. But maybe Dan's best guidance comes not from any direct advice, but from example. At my own wedding, Dan's best man wedding toast for me and Gershona started with a story. He told a little vignette from our time in Seattle together. One summer, I bought a propane grill in a box that you needed to assemble. And I asked Dan to come over to my apartment and help me assemble it. When he arrived, I'd spread all the parts across my living room floor. And we spent the entire afternoon putting it together and wrestling with a mysterious part called a Venturi tube, and somehow we couldn't get the thing to work. Eventually, we realized we needed one more piece. After calling half the hardware stores in Seattle, we finally found one that was open late and had the part. So we drove there. We got the part, we came back, we finished the grill, pulled it onto my deck. We didn't even have anything to cook. But we sat down in plastic chairs on my deck, maybe with a beer, and we watched the sunset over Mount Rainier. And then in a line that I guess I said, and it stuck with Dan, I apparently said, "You know, Dan, it's times like these." But then I never finished the sentence. But as Dan would later say at the wedding toast, he kind of understood what I meant. And so maybe that's Dan's guidance for how to write this eulogy. It's not about grand statements filled with adjectives. It's going to be some vignettes, some little moments that I want to share that defined a friendship from age 3 to 53. Here are a few of those moments. So the scene is, it's the early 1980s. We're elementary school age. We're in synagogue for the high holidays. Our mothers are sitting up close to the front, but Dan and I have chosen to sit way in the back so we could goof around during the service. Now, Dan, as you've heard, was not a super religious guy. He would sometimes say, "I'm half Jewish and half atheist." As far as I know, in the entire Jewish liturgy, there were only 2 prayers that he appreciated, but one of them comes during the high holiday service. It's said on both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it's called the Unetana Tokef. And in our synagogue in Kingston, the rabbi's custom was to call upon one particular congregant. You remember Paul Cooper, Sandy? You know who I'm talking about? Who had been a classically trained Shakespearean actor. And he would ask this gentleman to rise from his seat and read it aloud in English. And this gentleman would rise in his seat without any amplification. And he would intone in a stentorian voice that I can only mimic in a fraction of how good it sounded. This gentleman would say, "You open the book of remembrance, which proclaims itself, and the seal of each person is there. The great shofar is sounded. A still small voice is heard. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. How many shall pass away, and how many shall be born? Who shall live, and who shall die? Who shall reach the end of his days, and who shall not?" But we didn't like it so much because of the profundity. We liked it because the prayer would then continue listing some of the ways you could die 1,500 years ago. Who by sword, and who by wild beast? Who by famine, and who by thirst? But Dan's favorite moment came a little bit later. Who by strangulation? And who by stoning? So this is, before Beavis and Butthead, but like, here's this guy in temple saying you can die from getting stoned. That had us in stitches. That was Dan's favorite part of the service. But there was another part that we feared and dreaded, because our rabbi didn't just call on known people in advance, he would also cold call. So here we are, we're sitting in the back, and the rabbi would just say out of nowhere, and the next paragraph will be read by Daniel Giordano. So the problem is, Dan and I are goofing off. We're not paying attention. We don't know what page we're on, let alone which paragraph. The rabbi knew this, and he used this method to keep us on track. So we'd scramble to ask the people next to us, good attention-paying congregants, like where the hell we were in the service. And then Dan, or if I was called, would rise and recite what we hoped was the correct paragraph. Most of the time in English, but if the rabbi really wanted to test us, he'd say, "Thank you, Daniel. Please continue in the Hebrew." I don't know if this experience helped Dan, but for me at least, it turned out to be good preparation for law school. Another memory, it's 1985, some Sunday afternoon. After Hebrew school, Dan comes over to my house, and we play a few hours of a role-playing game called Top Secret. Top Secret is an espionage-themed game. It's supposed to be subtle and sophisticated. You're playing a spy, but this is 1985, and the movie Rambo: First Blood Part 2 has just come out. So Dan somehow turns our espionage campaign into a single-handed assault on an entire Soviet military facility. Another memory, it's October 25th, 1986. Some of you already know what date that means. Now, as background, in 2003, I moved to Massachusetts and I converted to New Englandism, but in 1986, I'm a New Yorker and I'm a Mets fan. And Dan and I are in my basement, we're eating microwave popcorn, and we are watching Game 6 of the World Series. It's the bottom of the 10th, a must-win game. And the Mets are down by 2. It's 2 out. 2 strikes on Ray Knight, and the scoreboard flashes, "Congratulations, Boston Red Sox, 1986 World Series champs." So Dan and I start throwing popcorn at the TV in protest, but also to distract the Red Sox closer, Calvin Schiraldi. Could work. And then the most improbable rally in the entire history of baseball happens. We keep throwing popcorn at the TV because we don't want to break the streak. And many of you know how this story goes. Mookie Wilson hits a ground ball, rolls right through Bill Buckner's legs, Ray Knight scores, and Dan and I erupt into the purest explosion of joy in my entire life, counting the birth of my children, sorry. And my mother, who's watching this on live stream, did make us clean up all the popcorn. Another memory, it's late in the summer of 1987. It's just a week or so before the start of junior high. Dan and I had not gone to the same elementary school, so this would be the first time that we would be in the same school. And Dan's parents are away on a child-free vacation to Grand Cayman. So Dan and Lori have been sent to stay over with friends. Dan's staying with me. He's in my bedroom on a mattress on the floor, but at some point during the day, Dan tells me that once we go to bed, he says, he needs to tell me something important in, and I quote, "a massive lights-out conversation." Now, even though we're in the same grade, I'm a year younger than Dan. And his friends among the Tilsonites are older, and some of them have older brothers, so I'm more innocent of the world. And I'm approaching this massive lights-out conversation with excitement, but also trepidation. Like, what are we gonna talk about? Like school, drugs, girls? Once I'm in bed, and he's on the mattress and the lights are out, Dan opens up. And what he has to talk about is more important than any of that. What he needs to tell me about is boat shoes. You see, if I don't want to be a complete loser in junior high school, I absolutely must have boat shoes. And that began our annual tradition of massive lights-out conversations, or as we came to abbreviate them, MLOCs. Another memory, it's the fall of 1990, just a few weeks into freshman year of college. I get a scary medical report that's going to require some unpleasant surgery. I guess I probably called my parents first, but I don't remember that conversation, because the next person I call is Dan. A few years later, still in the early 90s, I'm back in Kingston on some school break or something, and Dan and I meet up at the former Olympic Diner. And he brings this girl that he's told me about a few times. I think her name was Kim. Another memory, it's 1995. I'm talking to Dan on the phone. He's living in Tilson and working a job, but he doesn't love it. He's in fantastic shape from biking to work every day. There's a very steep hill not far from here in Rosendale, quads of steel, but overall, he feels a little stuck. And I have an apartment with a sort of an alcove, a semi-private area. And I say, why don't you come stay with me for a summer? You can, just get a summer job in Seattle. I say, worst case scenario, you get a different job that you also don't love, but you'll be living in Seattle with me. Another story, sometime in the mid-90s. This particular story is hazy. I don't have all the details because it didn't seem that important to me at the time, but it came back recently. We're at a gift shop somewhere in Seattle. I don't know where, I don't know why, but I do remember that the store sells little personalized souvenir nameplates with people's names on them, like miniature license plates or keychain ornaments, that sort of thing. And Dan picks one out and decides to buy it because he finds it funny. But he does not pick one that says Daniel, nor does he pick one that says Kim. For reasons that aren't totally clear to him even on that day, the nameplate that he buys says Al. It's 1997. It's probably around the same time that Dan helped me buy that propane grill. I've also, by this point, taken him with me to the dealer to buy my first car, a Saturn. And for those of you who remember the Saturn, you didn't even have to negotiate at the Saturn dealership. I still wanted Dan there with me. And now I bring him to Greg's bike shop in Seattle to help me buy a bicycle, and I still have that bike. It's July 2001, at Gershona and my wedding. Dan's the best man. I'm already standing at the chuppah, the wedding canopy. I'm facing forward, so I don't really see the people coming up behind me. And I'm a little bit nervous. And then I hear Dan pull up behind me, and he leans in close, and he says, "Don't worry, buddy, I got you back." If I went through all the previous 25, I've only gotten us up to 2001, right? So I would be here all day, and Dan is guiding me to keep it moving. So I'm gonna move into the next part of the speech. You open the book of remembrance, which proclaims itself, and the seal of each person is there. The seal of each person is there. What is Dan's seal? He had a great sense of snark. This past August, on my birthday, he sent me a GIF of Jack Nicholson extending the middle finger. Dan had a strong sense of civic responsibility. Along with our friend Aaron, we had a group chat that we called 3 Old Coots. It used to be 2 old coots and a young fellow, and then I turned 50, and then it became 3 old coots. Our texts were often just a stream of consciousness about news articles, about current events, often with a commentary along the lines of, "Can you believe these idiots?" When it came to politics and voting, Dan had no patience for people who willfully deluded themselves, who would vote for the leopards will eat your face party and then be shocked that a leopard is eating their face. And Dan was also incredibly, sometimes shockingly well-informed about the details of not just of current events, but also political history. You've already heard about his prodigious knowledge of music, but he also applied the same thirst for knowledge to events past. And this would come out randomly, like we'd be talking about some current thing, and he would say, like, "Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a similar incident involving the Secretary of Defense under Richard Nixon?" I can't count the number of times in just the past month that I've read some story in the news and I've wanted to forward it to Dan. I think to myself, oh, he would get a kick out of this, or possibly have something caustic to say about the folly of the people involved. He was unfailingly generous with time and practical advice, and I can't even begin to recite the number of topics he shared advice on. Home repair, computers, cars, whatever. If you needed help, Dan was there. "Don't worry, buddy, I got your back." When I started writing fiction and humor a few years ago, he was often my first reader, generously reading my drafts and generously helping filter the good ideas from the not so good ideas. Dan detested New Haven-style pizza. Just a passion. He described it as being, and I quote, "for serial killers." And I am pleased to report, as I know Dan would be, that the pizza we'll be sharing after this event does not include clams. Dan was a devoted husband and father. He took great pride in Kim's singing appearances, whether on stage or the national anthem at baseball games. He took great pride in Allison, or as the nameplate in that gift shop so many years ago said, Al. whether it was ice skating or taking college classes as a high school student or performing at Carnegie Hall. Being Kim's husband and Allison's father was the center of his life. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. How many shall pass away, and how many shall be born? Who shall live, and who shall die? Who shall reach the end of his days, and who shall not? Dan was taken from us too soon, far too soon. I should not have to stand here reading this eulogy for another 20 years, if not more. Neither should Kim or Allison or Lori need to be hearing it until then. Sandy shouldn't ever have to hear it, let alone deliver her own. If there's anything at all to hold on to in Dan's untimely passing, and I'm not saying there is, but if there was, it may be something that my daughter Mira said. We have to live the rest of our lives without Dan, but he got to live his entire life with us. He lost his father a few years ago after a long illness, but Dan went to the end accompanied by friends and family. Many of us who don't live in the Northwest flew out to Seattle in his final months, multiple times, to sit with him and maybe even tell a fart joke. The very last text message he sent me was on December 31st. I was in Seattle and I was going to be flying back to Boston the next day. And he wrote, "Snow on the way towards Boston tomorrow. Good luck." That was Dan. Even as he's lying there seriously ill, he's thinking about someone else. Our last in-person conversation was the next day, January 1st. At the end of a several-day visit, he asked to have some time alone with me, and he shared the news that he'd received, I think, just hours earlier. It was what we'd all feared, and we had a moment that I told him was the worst massive lights-out conversation ever. Dan was my best friend, and if he's guiding me now, he's probably telling me to wrap it up, because there's pizza and cannoli waiting. But I like to imagine him now in a place where he's finally at peace. Or maybe he's charging headfirst into a Soviet military fort with the bravery of John Rambo, wearing a sharp pair of boat shoes. But also where, in that massive lights-out conversation, he finally gets to hear, he finally gets to hear the end of that sentence that I started on my deck in Seattle all those years ago. You know, Dan, it's times like these that I realize how lucky I am to have come this far with you. I'm not crying, you're crying. There's a technique for chopping onions. Aaron showed it to me once, but I didn't learn it properly. You open the book of remembrance, which proclaims itself, and the seal of each person is there. Where is Dan's seal? The seal of Dan Giordano is here. It's in Allison. It's in Kim. It's in the stories that we tell. It's in the memories that we share of Dan. It's in the moments when we hear a funny story and we reach for our phones to text him before we remember he's not there. It's in the book of remembrance that lives not in heaven, but inside each of us. May his memory be a blessing, and may his soul be bound up in the bond of life.
Well, they built the Titanic to be one of a kind, but many ships have ruled the seas. They built the Eiffel Tower to stand alone, but they could build another if they please. The Taj Mahal, the pyramids of Egypt are unique, I suppose. But when they built you, brother, they broke the mold. Now the world is filled with many wonders under the past time something comes along, you know it's for sure the only one. The Mona Lisa, the David, the Sistine Chapel, Jesus, Mary, and Joe. And when they built you, brother, they broke them all. When they built you, brother, they turned dust into gold. And they built you, brother, they broke them all. They say you can't take it with you, but I think they're wrong. 'Cause all I know is I woke up this morning and something big was gone. Gone into that dark ether where you're still young and hard and cold. Just like when they built you, brother, and broke the mold. Now your death is upon us, and we'll return your ashes to the earth. And I know you'll take comfort in knowing you've been roundly blessed and cursed. But love is a power greater than death, just like the songs and stories told. And when she built you, brother, she broke the mold. Bad attitudes, a power stronger than death, alive and burning or stone cold. But when they built you, brother,
Go far enough and you will reach a place where the sea runs underneath. And we'll see our shadow high in the sky, dying away in the night. I've sailed the world for 7 years. And left all I love behind in tears. Oh, but won't you come back wherever you are? I've been all alone long enough because you have your own special way of holding my hand, holding high above the water. Don't ever let go. No, no, no. Yeah. she knows where she's going at all. And you have your own special way of holding my hand, holding high above that water, don't ever let go. No, no, no. Yes, you have your own special way of turning the world so it's facing the way that I'm going. Don't ever stop. Oh. Want me in the dreams, night after night. 'Cause the man in the moon, he's a blinding light. Now won't you come here, whoever you are? You followed me quite long enough because you have your own special way of holding my hand, holding high above the water, don't ever let go. No, no, no. Yes, you have your own special way of turning the world so it's facing the way that I'm going. Don't ever, oh, don't ever leave me. Oh.
This is open mic time, so anybody that has words they'd like to share, just come up and please speak.
Hello. My name is Allison, if you don't know. And I'm going to talk for a little bit because I'm one of the most important things to happen in my dad's life. His words. I think that's a little weird because he did receive a first-generation iPod for his birthday in 2002. Fun fact, only other time he's been speechless other than when I was born. So, I don't know. My dad had 2 performing arts people in his life, and he was always very, very proud of us. He went to everything, every concert, every performance, every birthday party, every Carnegie Hall performance. But he never was, super outright and proud about it. He would be like, very nice job, Allison. But the time I have seen him most proud was a very humble car ride. I was in 6th grade. We were taking a little day trip. And I, at the time, had an iPod of my own, my mom's old iPod Classic, and he had been putting music onto it, a lot of 60s, Beatles, Motown, Stevie Wonder, Elton John, and we're driving the car, the song comes on. And, I'm back there and I'm listening, and I'm like, wait, is this Can't Hurry Love by the Supremes, sung by Phil Collins? And my dad's driving, and he goes, my wonderful child! And I'm like, ah! He saw me perform at Carnegie Hall. That is when he was most proud of me. Another thing I would like to mention is that during the reception, we're gonna toast to him with Diet Coke, because I was talking to him after we'd gotten the news about him not being able to continue treatment. I was like, listen, I've had this idea for forever that whenever you pass away, whenever that may be, we should toast to you with your favorite beverage, Diet Coke, at your memorial. I'm like, would you be okay with that? Like, is that a little weird? He's like, absolutely, do it. Not the only person to think of that. Go, do it. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Don't be shy.
I'm just going for the good tissues. Kim, I'm going to try to keep the inappropriate humor down to a minimum.
You know what? You're not in a church. Do that's fine.
Good call.
Yes.
Hi, everyone.
Who are you?
I'm going to get to that after the opening. I actually prepared this, yeah. I'd like to regale you with tales of the barbarian Dan Halen, who journeyed the lands with the elf druid Zilphine, that had an affinity for talking to spiders, to return to their queen, whose voice tamed the reckless barbarian. Oh wait, this is the wrong crowd. Sorry. Where to begin? How do you begin with a eulogy that I didn't ever think I'd have to do or want to do? So I guess, the first thing that came to my mind was a cleverly put together montage of Mystery Science Theater 3000 episodes that I'm confident would have pretty much summed every moment I had with Daniel together. But, like any good IT guy, Dan would have probably reminded me about IP and end user agreement and the rights to that material, so, I decided against that. So I suppose I should take it back to the beginning. My name is Sam, and I met Dan in 7th grade at Bailey, along with many of the other men in this room, in Mr. Moore's social studies class. We became fast friends, and while we were probably there to learn, what I wanted to do every morning was talk to Dan about Dr. Demento on Sunday night, which is what he introduced me to. And for those of you who don't know it, think Weird Al Yankovic times 10 or 100. It was my favorite part of going to school. And he made me aware of that. Eventually, I became worthy enough, and the godfather of the Tilsonites embraced me as the 6th honorary one, because Ron was clearly number 5. For the rest of you who don't know what that means, it's better than being the 5th and 6th Beatle. That friendship grew over the years, and Dan entered his band geek phase and rolled his eyes when I entered my skateboarder phase, but through the whole time we found common ground constantly in many, many things. I remember Sandy once telling me she chose the name Daniel because it meant God is my witness. And Daniel was my witness, and I was his. We continued in student government in high school together at his suggestion because it was something we could do together. And clearly because he wanted to serve and, be with peers and help everyone. Let's see here, hold on, I gotta focus here. That same service brought us to yet another friend, Matt Brown, who may or may not be in the crowd. If you're here, Matt, yell. Yo. There he is. So picture Dan and I getting a speech from, well, not a speech, but an invitation from Mr. Van, our student government advisor, that says, hey, could you two guys show this kid around? Which the irony of which is about to hit you when you realize that at the time, Matt was and is still visually impaired, which opened up Dan for the first of an incessant amount of blind jokes at Matt's expense. And in Dan's honor, when Matt texted me on Friday afternoon and said he would be here, he'd see me on Saturday. I said, if Dan were here, he'd say, you just said, you're gonna see us. Yeah. So Dan and I get assigned the task, which we were fine to do, of showing this student around. We didn't know, that Matt was visually impaired, and it didn't matter because he fit right in when the three of us fell asleep in math class. It was, I'm surprised we didn't all end up in whatever the equivalent of detention was at that time. Time jump, post-high school, post-college. Dan took a page from Ron's book, One of Many, and said, hey, why don't you come out to Seattle? It's worked out great for me. And sure enough, I packed up my Honda Civic with everything that I owned and drove cross-country and crashed on his not-so-small alcove, his studio apartment in the U District, and spent the greatest summer of my life with the greatest guy. It was the best time. We went to see the South Park movie at the Neptune? And Dan's laughter, in addition to his just general stature as the giant teddy bear that I knew him to be, I thought he was gonna shake the seats free from their bolts, or we were going to be asked to leave. I will never forget that laughter in that moment. And if you haven't seen the South Park movie, think about Dan when you do finally see it. Husband to Kim, father to Allison, son to Ralph and Sandy, brother to Lori, leader of the Tilsonites. Dan was all these things and more. I'm jumping around a little bit because normally I would have used Dan to run these things by for guidance. As we got older, we often spoke about growing up, and I always valued his counsel. I looked to him when I had to deliver my first and only other eulogy besides this one not long ago, inspired by the one he delivered for Ralph. It was quite moving for me, and I was so proud of him. His Kiss Me Kate proposal to Kim, for me, was legendary. I was caught completely off guard when he shared the story with me, and I was so proud of him and so amazed that he could pull it off with that much chutzpah. Did I get that right, Sandy? I mean, Daniel for me was the quiet, reserved one, and this was such a bold statement, and it just clearly showed how much he loved Kim and how much he was ready for it. Years later, I would try to emulate that with my own attempt at having an epic proposal, and I did it in his honor. It still wasn't as cool as that. He had chops, he really did.
He had help.
Yeah, well, it's okay, we'll take it. I loved his gift for comedic timing, especially when you didn't see it coming, which was pretty much every time. I watched Dan dismiss what I claim to be the first ever documented case of road rage with the universe's most perfect execution of a middle finger I've ever seen in my life. It was awesome. I looked forward to his visits home over the years, especially those when we were able to visit the Holy Land. The Texas Diner. For those of you who don't know, it's now called Kings Valley Diner, and it's just not the same. Many of our best times were spent there late at night, into the wee hours of the morning, talking about everything we could imagine under the sun. Author Joseph Campbell wrote a book that talks about the hero's journey, and it's basically like, probably maybe closer than the Bible or the scripture for Dan and a lot of us that, basically lived our lives based on the premise of Star Wars and how it affected us. It was part of so many discussions about everything: our children, our wives, our lives, our jobs, our phone calls, emails, group chats, texts over the years. We probably talked about that more than anything, and I will miss those talks. And I still think about moments since he passed where I want to call him and tell him that. He fought bravely, and he will never be from our thoughts. Dan's hero's journey is at an end. The Valkyries lift him up and bid him take their place amongst them in the halls of Valhalla, where the brave may live forever. Daniel will live forever with us. Thank you.
Hi. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dan's sister. I'll never know. Let me start again. I know I'll never hear your voice again, but it's still the sound that my heart still listens for in the quiet times. You're now gone from my life, yet you live in every part of me. I will miss you for the rest of my days. I love you, Daniel.
I'll be brief, I promise you I will. But it does require more paper, so sorry about that. So I've been friends with Dan my entire life, and when I say entire life, I mean literally. Dan and I are less than 2 weeks apart in age. And actually, as a matter of fact, there were 5 of us, of all the youth of Tilson at the time growing up, who were born in 5 consecutive months in 1972. If I remember correctly, it was Eric in March, and Chris in April, Dan in May, myself in June, and Todd in July. Our families, the Giordanos and the Langleys, actually, we kind of bookended one street in Tilson, and just a lot ensued in between. Just a lot of wonderful memories with Dan and his family. But a few weeks back, when I was watching the service out in Seattle, one of the things that struck me was the familiarity of what many of you out there and are watching right now had to say. And it kind of had me thinking, what was at the root of some of Dan's interests and traits? And there are 3 things that came to mind that, if you'll humor me, I'll just walk you through. First is, and it's been mentioned and alluded to before, but Dan, the tech guy. How did that start? Well, perhaps you know Dan through his career in Seattle, his iTech savvy, etc. But if we go back to December, I think 1983, and one of the biggest events of the 80s occurred. You probably all know what I'm talking about by now. Yes, it's the VHS release of Michael Jackson's Thriller music video. At 11 years old, Dan decided to have a sleepover at his house to coincide with the monumental event. And all the usual suspects from the neighborhood were invited. I believe Ron was there as well. But one of the reasons that this was taking place at the Giordano household was because I think they were the only ones with a videotape machine at the time. Thus began the life of Dan as an early adopter. From tackling the dawn of a home computer to the portability of a Sony Walkman, Dan was doing it first. So for all of you who have leaned on Dan for some technological help, you can thank the King of Pop as well. Second was Dan the music lover. And we'll segue there. Dan's appreciation went far and wide and is well chronicled and has been well chronicled tonight. However, the one artist who has not been mentioned, surprisingly, is one to this day I'll still be wondering about. I mean, sure, we all have our music indulgences, things we maybe don't like to admit we listen to in our quiet time. And as a kid in middle school, Dan may have been on an island with this one, but he was very proud of planting his flag there. And I give him a lot of respect for moving the boundaries of musical tastes well beyond what the rest of us were listening to. So I ask all of you, at some point soon, to please cue up Copacabana by Barry Manilow. And think of Dan. Lastly, the third point is Dan the genuine friend. The best testament to how Dan lived his life comes from hearing the stories of your friendships with him. Not just as an acquaintance or someone you would hang out with, but someone who was indeed genuine in being present with you and truly having an interest in you, what you were doing, your likes and your milestones, your concerns and your needs. And this certainly extends to not just Dan as a friend, but how we witness him as a husband and as a father. Around 1990-ish, when all of our paths started to run less parallel with each other, Dan did something that to me was quite remarkable. Because for years after, at my parents' house, there would be a knock at the door, sometimes during the holidays when we were back home from college, or after he and Kim were moved to Seattle. That knock would come when they were back east for a brief period of time. It was Dan checking in to say hi, or to see how my mom and dad were doing, or when I was there to figure out some time to get together. And I assume I wasn't the only one he was dealing with this. I know many of you probably have similar moments. At nearly 35 years later, he was still making time like that for everyone. His interest in all of you, all of us, was sincere and authentic and genuine. So to Kim and Allison, to Sandy and Lori, I will always be grateful that your husband, your dad, your son, your brother, was the greatest of friends as well.
I don't have anything written on paper, so. So I'm Amy, for those of you who don't know. I'm one of Dan's friends from high school. And
Junior prom picture in the photo slideshow.
and junior prom, true. So I had an opportunity to share some thoughts about Dan in Seattle at his service there. And I shared a lot of more serious thoughts, like the fact that Dan was absolutely the collector of people. I don't know anybody who has as many lifelong and long-term, genuine, deep friends. I love about Dan that it didn't matter how much time went between conversations or between when we would see each other, and I'm sure that many of you had this experience with him as well. He would pick up like you had just been with him the day before. I've never spent time with somebody who would ask so many questions, but genuinely want the answers to them. Like, he just made you feel like he cared about everything that was happening in your life at every given moment. But as soon as I was done speaking, I said to Kim afterwards, I did not take that opportunity to share a funny memory of Dan, and he would be so disappointed in me for that. some of my biggest laughs in high school were with Dan. Like, I can still hear him laughing and see him laughing so clearly in my mind. And some of our biggest laughs were things surrounding the tank, which was the very large car that was his dad's, that he would, drive around in and drive fast and do all the things. But I don't know if any of you remember this, but one day, parking at Kingston High School was always a big issue. If you didn't have money to pay for the paid lot at the bottom, or you were late, you had to find a spot on a side street somewhere. And one day I walked into the band hallway, and there was Dan doing his nervous pacing thing. Arms are flying in the air. He looks completely distressed. And I remember walking up to him and saying, Dan, what is wrong? And he turns around and he says, they're going to kill me. And I said, who's gonna kill you? What are you talking about? He's like, well, my parents are away. They're in Grand Cayman right now. And I said, yes. He said, it was 6 inches. Again, I'm still not understanding. I'm like, what do you mean it was 6 inches? What are you talking about? He said, I parked my car on a side street, and I swear I must have been overlapping that driveway by only 6 inches. And they towed my dad's car. Right? It's oh my gosh. So he was so afraid that he was going to be murdered, and and then he immediately resumed his nervous pacing. If you've ever seen Dan do it, I hope you can play that back in your mind. But so, we were trying to figure out what to do, and actually one of our teachers had to take him to the impound lot to retrieve his dad's car. And he thought that he got away with it, but Kim and Allison and I were laughing about this story in Seattle not too long ago, and they relayed to me that, in fact, he did not get away with it because his parents knew that it happened all along, so. Oh, only you. Okay, so only his mom knew, which is why Dan is still alive, right? But truly, Kim and Allison, you were the love and light of his life. And, to all of our other long-term friends who are here, he loved all of you. He was just such a good person, and I will carry that with me, along with so many funny memories forever.
A eulogy for my son Daniel. How do you begin to eulogize your son? Who would ever think that you would have to do that? I think one of the hardest parts of this loss is realizing that my son, who gave me some of my best memories, has now become a memory. At his wedding, he and I danced to the song, which I chose, Unforgettable. And I think that song is as fitting today as it was then. Daniel had so many varied interests. Looking around, seeing all of you here today, family, friends, people whose lives he touched, tells you everything about who Dan was. He connected with people, as everybody has been saying before. He cared about people, and people cared about him. The way that I knew how much many of his friends cared about him was when he was in Seattle, sick. I believe it was 8 of his East Coast friends flew out to visit him, to be with him, to share time with him, to make him laugh, and they did. And some of them even more than once. He had a kind word for everyone he met. In true Daniel fashion, I went looking for words to help make sense of this loss, and a very good friend sent me this. Excuse me. Grief is all of the unexpressed love that you no longer get to share with someone. Daniel was an amazing man. He left us far too soon, and there really aren't enough words to express how much he will be missed. He worked hard, he enjoyed life. Most of all, he enjoyed his family, Kim and Allison, deeply. I was so proud to be his mother. My pride in him only grew throughout this terrible illness, which he faced quietly and with such strength and dignity. He was a devoted son, and being his mother has been one of the greatest honors of my life. When my husband Ralph died, I found a quote that stayed with me, and I want to share it again today because it feels right for Daniel too. We die once when the last breath leaves our body. We die a second time when the last person speaks our name. The first death is beyond our control, but the second death we can strive to prevent. So please, keep talking about Daniel, keep telling his stories, keep playing the music he loved, keep saying his name. Daniel, my son, I love you. You can go on that side, I'll go on this side.
I'm going to say the mourner's Kaddish now. You lead, I'll just sort of be back.
Yeah, tell everybody it's on the back.
It's for those who want to see them, it's on the back of your program, on the bottom.
Yitgadal,
V'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, Be'alma, Divrach, Chirutei, V'yamlich, Malchutei, V'chayachon, V'yomechon, V'chayei, Dechol, Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala, V'zman Kariv, V'imru, Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevarach, Le'olam, Olamei, Amaya, Yisbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yipa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitalal, Shmei Dekudisha, Brichu. Ela min kol berchata, V'shirata, Tushbechata, V'nechemata, Damiran, Be'alma, V'imru, Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba min Shmaya, V'chayim Aleinu, Ve'al kol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen. Oseh Shalom, V'imromav, Huya Aseh Shalom, Aleinu, Ve'al kol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen.
I didn't bring any paper. I took a note from my husband and I made notes on my phone. I can't believe all of you are here today. Thank you. The only guidance that Dan gave me for his memorial was, quote, "You don't have to play all Genesis songs." And I think we got that taken care of. Who gets 2 memorials? That guy.
That's how much Dan was loved, as evidenced by all of you being here today and all of us who joined us in Kirkland a few weeks ago. It felt right to do a memorial on both coasts, as we both held our bi-coastal connections so dearly. And a movie theater felt like a very good place to do this too. Dan saw movies in this theater since he was a child. In fact, Tim was telling me about how, I think, was it Star Wars that you guys saw here? Yeah. So he saw many movies in this theater since he was a child, including many when we came back to visit. I don't remember all the movies that we saw here, but he would have, complete with commentary, reviews, his own opinions, and 3 podcast episodes to let you know more information about them. Thank you all for traveling here to be here today. I know some of you came from a very long way, and your presence is so comforting to us. Especially those personally that I haven't seen in years. So if I burst into tears when I saw you, it's really because of that. Thank you to all of you for watching online. Knowing that you took the time to be with us virtually means so much. And thank you to Ron and Mark and Tim for all that you did to help out with the service today. Allison and I and the rest of our family are forever grateful. Thank you for supporting me and my family in these last months. In person, from afar, food, financial support, moral support, cards, packages. From Dan's diagnosis in late October to his death on January 17 to now, you have lifted us up and held us up when we couldn't do that for ourselves. Thank you. That is community. And Dan was always about community, so thank you. I don't know if Andy is watching today, but I wanted to say thank you to Andy back in Washington for helping to build the photo slideshow that you saw. And thank you to the entire Sears family for being literally by our side since the moment they found out Dan was sick. Life does indeed go on, as Allison and I have talked about. The only person whose life stopped way too early was Dan's. And for all of us, we have to figure out a way to go on. And everyone does grieve in their own way. So please don't forget about us. Please continue to check in on us. We may not get back to you right away, but know that our hearts are always in the right place. I have some logistics now to tell you about. We have Savona's Pizza. I'm so excited. Every time we would come back to visit, Dan would always seek out Savona's, even if it was just for lunch. I'm thinking about going to Savona's for lunch. You want some? Sure. So after we finish here, it may take us a few minutes to set it up. A lot of you asked me if you could help. Would be a great time to help. Beverages will be served from the concession stand. Non-alcoholic beverages are complimentary. And there's also popcorn. So please feel free to have popcorn. One of Dan's favorite treats when he came to the movie theater was a big bag of popcorn. And I would always say, well, what are we going to do for dinner? Why do I need to have dinner? I just had popcorn. And we have Diet Coke for a toast in Dan's memory. Another reminder that if you're in town, Shiva will be observed from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. each day, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of this week at Sandy's home, the Giordano home in Tilson. Please see one of us if you need the address. Dan also had a soundtrack to his life that he played all of his life. You'll see a QR code in the top right of your program. That QR code links to a Spotify playlist that I put together that I made out of Dan's top 1,000 songs playlist. He also had playlists of like unplayed top songs or top 500 out of the top 1,000. Never ending. When Dan was hospitalized for his heart attack and they wanted to get a brain MRI to confirm his strokes, he of course had to answer many questions prior to going in the machine, and one of the first was if he had metal in his body. And from his hospital bed, he quipped, "No, but I saw Metallica in '92, complete with the horn hand signal." Which he did up until 3 days before he died. From times like that to wanting to hear funny cancer jokes, thank you, Ron and Aaron, for sending very funny cancer jokes, to making light of any serious situation, sometimes to my own frustration. Dan knew that humor was one of the best things to use to move through life. He did so right until the very end. I'll tell you that in hospice, we moved him to hospice about 5 days before he died, and they have a getting to know you board on the hospice where you're listing your name, what you do, your interests, things that you like. And so I tried to fill it out as much as I could, and one of the things was, like, what don't you like? And it was people asking me too many questions and things like that. And so after he'd woken up and had a more lucid moment, I said, "Look, I filled this out for you. What do you think?" And he was like, "Thanks, dude." So he used humor he knew that humor was one of the best things to use to move through life. And if he was here, he would end today with some funny joke or quote, like a Letterman-esque, "Good night, everybody." The Letterman theme. So please take a lesson from Dan. Love. Make sure your people know you love them. Laugh. Vote. And live. Live your life. I said to Allison, Dan loved life, but in some ways he was afraid to fully live his life. Don't be afraid to live your life. Enjoy your life. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you.